Welcome to the Love Lab Podcast, the place to be for honest and real talk about relationships and sex. Whether you're a man or woman, single or a couple, this is the show for you. I am your host, Kevin Anthony, and I am here to help you have the relationship of your dreams and the best sex of your life. All right, welcome back to the Love Lab Podcast. This is episode 385, and it is titled, A Former Legal Courtesan Talks About Sex, Love, and the Business of Prostitution. Today is going to be an interesting episode. I have a guest today, which if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, you can see her. She is a former legal courtesan. So I think you all know what that means. And we're going to have a conversation today about that experience. But it's not really just about, okay, tell us some fun stories about crazy, shit that happened to you. There might be some of that. So stay tuned if you want to hear that. But the idea of today's show is to learn from her experience. And I'm really curious to know a whole bunch of things. So I, as a sex coach, occasionally have people, clients of mine, people will reach out via email and they'll ask about things like, maybe I should go to a sex surrogate, or maybe I should go to a courtesan or something like that. And so it is something that comes up. And what I really want from this episode is we want to talk about the realities of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? If there's positive things that we can learn from it, great. And if there's some things we need to be aware of, great. I want to get all of that in. And I'm really curious about, somebody who spends basically their entire working, day or life in the realm of sex and love. What have they learned from that? Because a lot of people, they'll go through life, they get married young, whatever, they probably don't have nearly as much sex. And so they don't learn as much. Like, what does somebody who's a pro, so to speak, I'm doing the air quotes thing, like, what has she learned from all of this, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. As always, before we get started, I have a few words from my sponsors. Ladies, did you know that the overwhelming majority of men consider receiving oral sex a must in their relationship? Of course you did, because men have been asking you for it your whole life. But do you feel confident in your ability to give great oral sex? If you tend to avoid it because you don't feel like you're good at it, or if you feel that you're pretty good at it, but want to get even better, then my new Blowjob Mastery course is for you. I have teamed up with the amazing coach Ree Duong of Eternal Love to bring you a practical and easy to follow course that is guaranteed to increase your confidence and skill when giving oral sex to your man. In this course, you will get all the secrets to mastering the art of oral sex with step-by-step instructions and multiple live demos. Go to sacredfemininearts.com/BJ Mastery. That's sacredfemininearts.com/BJ Mastery. And then, of course, Power and Mastery 3.0 for the men out there. Power and Mastery 3.0 is the latest version of the popular men's sexual mastery course. If you're struggling with erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, or simply want to increase your skills in the bedroom, then Power and Mastery is for you. Join the exclusive club of men who have taken their sexual performance into their own hands and become sexual masters. Mastering your sexuality is a key component to becoming the man she has always dreamt of and craves. Don't leave your sexual performance up to chance or the throw of the dice. Become a sexual master today by going to powerandmastery.com/sexual-mastery. That's powerandmastery.com/sexual-mastery. So we got a little something for the women, a little something for the men to improve your skills so that you can show up in the bedroom as your best self and, of course, please your partner and make your whole relationship and life better. I also got here, I got to show these, some t-shirts I made last year. More orgasms, less wars. Here's the female version. We got the male one over here as well. You can find those on my website, kevinanthonycoaching.com. That was a phrase uttered by one of my guests, and I said, oh my God, that's great. We need to put that on a t-shirt. So there it is. If you want to support the work that I do, obviously you can buy my courses. You can also buy some t-shirts. Whatever, works for you. It helps support the work that I do. Okay. My guest today is Miss Nicole Brooke, and she is a former preschool teacher turned professional lover who is on a mission to decriminalize sex work in America and win women's rights once and for all. She is the founder of Sexy Sunday School, which serves as a hub for the sex work education and houses her original confidence, coaching methodology called Find Your Sexy that sexually empowers women through dance and deep inner work. After living in Spain for 13 years, she is back in her hometown of Las Vegas and often travels to New York City for work. Welcome to the show, Miss Nicole.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you so much.
All right, so we really just got to dive in head first here,
Go.
which is like your bio is like former preschool teacher, and then the title is like legal courtesan. How does one go from being a preschool teacher to a legal courtesan? Tell us a little something about your background and how you ended up in that work.
Yeah, so definitely there were a lot of steps that had to be taken to get me from a preschool teacher to a professional dancer to a professional lover. From a personal standpoint, when I was 7 years old, I wanted to be an exotic dancer. I grew up in Las Vegas, and I remember one day I was in the car with my grandma, and I was like, "Hey, grandma, what happens in those places over there?" Pointing at a strip club. She's like, "Well, the women take off their clothes, they dance around, and men throw money at them." And I was like, "Cool, sign me up." And
Seven
so,
years
like,
old.
yeah, yeah. And so like that sensuality, that freedom, the sexiness kind of always lived as a dream inside of me. And as I grew up throughout the years, like I had this desire. I want to be sexy. I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be beautiful. I want to be sexy. And maybe my soul already knew that in the world that we live in today, it's not about survival of the fittest. It's about survival of the sexiest. Who can be the sexiest wins. And so I grew up with just my mom and my grandmother. And my dad was never in the picture. And so I was always looking for a masculine source of energy. And so I was boy crazy. I loved boyfriends. I had them throughout elementary, middle school, high school. And so I was always very drawn toward love and romance. But when my dreams of being an exotic dancer was squashed, and I knew that I wanted to follow my academia like career. I graduated valedictorian from my high school. I got a full ride scholarship to Lehigh University. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do with my life? And I decided to go down the route of education. So I got my master's in education for the little kids. Because as a woman, we are everything. We are the mother, the maiden, the crone, the holy one, the whore. We're everything. And so I was really drawn to be with children because I volunteered for a association for kids with cancer throughout my entire childhood. And so I was really drawn to children. And that's what I decided to do. I have my degree in psychology and Spanish as well. And because I wanted to become fluent in Spanish, I decided to move abroad to Spain. And then I found the perfect job as being a preschool / kindergarten teacher at American schools in Spain. Now, once I moved to Spain, that's when the dancer came out of me. I kind of had a little bit of dance here and there throughout my life, but it wasn't until I moved to Spain where I had the real opportunity to immerse myself in Latin dancing. And so I became an expert in salsa, bachata, kizomba, zouk. And that's when my sexuality really began to flourish. Like I was always sexually active, like since I was right before I was 16. I had my virginity taken by a Mormon boy. And it was in Spain where I allowed myself to just explore. And so I started sleeping with a lot of men because they were delicious. They weren't your typical white boy from America here, which I was not attracted to at all, but it was the Latin lovers. And so I started having a lot of sexual experiences while I was in Spain. And as I was more in the dance studio, I was like, oh, I don't really feel like being a preschool teacher. I just want to dance. And so it was my love and passion for dance that kind of drew me into that scene and away from the kindergarten scene. When my mom passed away 5.5 years ago, I realized that life is too short to be stuck inside of a classroom. And I decided it was a miracle and a blessing that I was able to get unemployment for 2 years in Spain. And that's when I started my women's empowerment movement, Find Your Sexy. When I switched from the classroom, I actually became a certified spiritual coach with the Jay Shetty certification program. And I thought, okay, well, I don't like to be like anyone else. I like to create my own things. And so I asked myself, how can I use dancing, sensual dance, and my coaching certification. And I came up with Find Your Sexy, and I inspired and motivated hundreds of women in Barcelona to find their sexy. Find your sexy. If you're watching the video, you can see my tattoo here. And it was in finding my sexy and exploring my sexuality and empowering other women to do it that I stepped more and more into my sexuality. So then let's see. Then I started walking with Christ, which is a little twist in the story. And that ended up making my life explode into a million pieces because my sexy community was like, oh, she's a little bit too spiritual and religious now. And then the religious and spiritual side was, oh, she's a little bit too sexy for us. And it was in that moment that I had already began dancing exotically on the pole, on the chair, in burlesque. I had my own show at the Burlesque Museum, the Erotic Museum of Barcelona, and I started to be on the stage. So I started expressing my sexy. And then I used my skills in exotic dancing at the strip club in Spain when my life exploded and I had no money anymore. And Spirit was like, Nicole, you should use your skills in dancing. Finally, now. But the thing, Kevin, about strip clubs in Spain is that they're not exactly strip clubs; they're brothels. And so I was like, "Oh, this is a plot twist. I just started walking with Christ, and now you're putting me inside of a brothel. What is that about?" And since I had already slept with like 100 men at that point, you could call yourself an expert at that point. And I was like, I am worth charging money for this now. But when I started at the brothel, I said, hey, I just want to dance. I don't want to see any dicks. I don't want to do anything. No, I just want to dance. But on the first night, the owner was like, hey, there's these two French guys who want to have an orgy with you and two other women at the brothel. Would you like to join in? And I was like, okay, this is the moment, Nicole. You decide. Do you want to take on the label prostitute? Do you want to charge money for the first time for sex? And my soul was like, yeah, I do. I do. I do. I did it and I loved it. And that's how I began to I began down the path of prostitution in Spain, and I've been exploring it for the past year and a half. I'm not in it really anymore, but yeah, that's kind of how the story evolved from wanting to be a stripper at 7 years old, and then following my path to pole dancing, and then using my skills in the brothels in Spain.
Okay, so that was quite a lot that you shared. There's a couple of things we need to go back to there. The first one is when I hear a story like that, like you're 7 years old, you're driving in the car with grandma, and you're like, what happens in there? That's what I want to do. It's stories like that that sometimes really make me wonder, how much control do we really have in this life? Like, where does a
Mm.
7-year-old who doesn't even know what the building is get that idea from? And then when she's told, oh, this is what happens. Like most young children, especially girls, would be like, oh my God, that's gross. Like, I can't believe that. Ew, that's scary, or whatever. It's like that's the reaction most if they truly even understood what they were told. Right. So, but then here you are going, oh my God, I feel this calling at 7 to do that. That just makes me wonder sometimes, like, if there's an argument for reincarnation, I swear that's one of them, right?
Yes,
It just
sir.
kind of blows my mind in that sense. So that was one interesting thing. Uh, and that kind of leads me into the second interesting thing, which is you shared this story of how you ended up, here. And there is a perception for sure when it comes to prostitution that every woman who ended up there did so by coercion or because she hit Skid Row or because she was desperate or trafficked or something like that. Now, we'll talk about that because there is a reality of that. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. However, that's not at all how you got there. I mean, starting at age 7, you're like, yeah, I want to be an exotic dancer. I want to take my clothes off for men, right? And you always were interested in being as sexy as you could be and using your sex, in whatever way felt right to you. And so I just think that's interesting for people to hear that not everybody that chooses it is necessarily a victim.
Correct.
Having said that, there are a lot that really are. So we can't deny that reality of it either. But the other thing I wanted to point out too is I think there's a perception too that, women will end up there because that's all they can do.
Mm,
But you're highly educated, right? You've got, it sounds like multiple degrees from what you shared. So, like, there's lots of things you could do,
mm-hmm,
but that's something that you chose to do.
mm-hmm.
So, I just think that's a really interesting sort of origin story that's very different than what most people would think when you talk about somebody who was, a legal courtesan. So, okay, now we know the origin story. We know how you ended up there. Once you were there, what was it like? In other words, what was your experience? Did you have this moment where you're like, oh shit, what did I get myself into? Or were you like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. Why did I wait so long? Was there something in between? Like, what were your thoughts as you were actually living and working in this field?
Well, before I answer that question, I would like to say a couple of comments about your interesting points, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, about the car, I think that it's a very interesting point how you said, how much control do we really have in this life? Like, I am being used by spirit to prove some points about the human conditioning. I grew up in Las Vegas. I grew up with billboards of naked women or half naked women all the time. And I started to piece things together. But it was for my highest good to put me on the path that I was meant to walk, because when I went into the brothel system, spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, um, did tell me, like, Nicole, you are now an erotic reporter. I need you to be the eyes and the ears on the ground so that you can use this information to later help people. So it was myself setting myself up. Like, my life story, if you look at it from a bird's eye view, is actually really beautiful how everything is just coming together. And it speaks a lot to one thing that I missed out on. It was in the car was some distant relatives who I never really talked to them. They were the ones who immediately, when I said, "Ooh, that's fun, sign me up," they were the ones who were like, "Oh my God, no, you can't do that." And it was suppressed. But if your soul is meant for something, it's meant for something. And it eventually found its way out to blossom when it was time. So then, the second point, yes, I am very educated. I can do a lot of things. And I think that in that moment, and this will lead into that third point, the question that you just asked me was, using my skills in dancing made me money immediately. That I know that I have been building a foundation of who I am with Find Your Sexy, with Sexy Sunday School, for a while, but I know that those are seeds that need to be planted over time. And it was the exotic dancing and eventually the prostitution that made me the amount of money that I needed now to survive. And so when I went into it the first time, oof, I mean, I had just moved out of Barcelona. I was there for about 8 years, and I moved to Empuriabrava, Brava, a small beach town about an hour north of Barcelona. And this was after I was literally socially isolated from everyone. Like, the majority of people thought that I was crazy because, yeah, I was going through spiritual psychosis. I was like full time manifesting the second coming of Christ, and I was passionate about it. And I needed that time to walk with God one on one. And so then he walked me on over to Empurio Brava. And when, gosh, Kevin, the amount of like energy that the downloads I was getting of like, Nicole, it's time. There was just so many divine synchronicities of like, it's time to go to the strip club. It's time to put yourself out there again. I wasn't performing at that time. I wasn't out there at that time. And so it was socially jarring of like, okay, now I'm in the limelight. But it was a motivation to get back into my body, because I wasn't doing anything. And so now I had a stage to myself. I could perform to whatever songs I wanted to, and I could ignite my sexual energy again and use my natural skills in seduction. And when you do that as a woman, you empower yourself. You're growing into a stronger version of a woman. And so the first time that I did it, like, it was actually really beautiful because one of the French guys I had a really beautiful connection with, and he and I were just like, I just want to stay with you. I don't want your brother, and I don't want these other girls. And so we were like trying to stay to ourselves, but like we had to entertain them as well. So it was very interesting because in that very first moment of the orgy, I was able to see both the positive and the negative side of prostitution. I got to see and feel oh, I'm connecting with this man. This is beautiful because it's love. It's a love connection at the end of the day. But with the other one, he was a little bit more drunk. He was a little bit more abrasive. He wanted to like stick his tongue down my throat. And I was just like, yeah. So it did highlight how there are instances where I'm not so attracted to this man, but then there's other instances where I am fully like, yes, take me. I love you too. So it really showed me both sides of it. But I was ready. I was ready.
You brought up the part about, becoming spiritual and following Christ. That's something that I actually wanted to talk about, but there's so many moving parts during a show. Sometimes I don't remember every last little thing I want to talk about, but since it came up again a second time, that is something that's really curious because
Yeah.
I think most people would think that these two things are very much mutually exclusive. Like if you consider yourself a Christian and spiritual, you wouldn't ever consider doing something like this. And if you did something like this, there's no way that you could possibly be, Christian and spiritual. And so tell me and you kind of alluded to this already, but how did you in your mind and in your life find a way to reconcile those two?
Yeah, that's a really good point, a really beautiful question, and a really big pillar behind Sexy Sunday School. So, when I started walking with Christ, I wasn't just walking with Yeshua, Master Jesus. No, no, no. I was walking with Mary Magdalene. And in fact, this is another part of my story, but in my awakening, the reason why it was so intense is because my passed away mother, who was my biggest spiritual ally, she told me, Nicole, you were Mary Magdalene in your past life. And I'm like, but I don't even know who she is. And so I started doing my research on her and I started awakening. And I started to realize there's a huge rumor out there that she's a prostitute. So one of the reasons why I was drawn to prostitution or walked hand in hand to the brothel door was to find out for myself, was I really a prostitute? And so that was one of the reasons why I was so drawn toward it. And then I started doing my research and I'm like, wait, prostitution is the earliest biblical profession of women, which signifies that not only have women been selling sex, but men have been buying sex since the beginning of time. Wait, is
The
this?
other side of the equation that's often left out.
Yeah, yeah, and that's definitely another part that I would like to talk to you about. But I went into prostitution and I found out a lot about the spiritual origin of prostitution, how it was actually a gift from the goddess to teach to women to defend themselves, to use it as a way of prosperity, of protection. And I learned the sacred origins of prostitution, which allows me to rightfully defend myself in Sexy Sunday School and saying that, yes, both truths, both things can exist at the same time. And it was Christ, both of the Christs who guided me into this to be able to speak about those truths to humanity.
So that's so interesting. If you dive into alternative Christian teachings,
Gnostic Christianity. I practice Gnostic Christianity.
yeah, if you dive into some of that stuff, for instance, we know that the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was one that was taken out during the Council of Nicaea. They found it in a clay pot buried in the desert somewhere, and it told a
Mhm.
very different story. But that
Mhm.
whole idea of Mary Magdalene being a prostitute, according to the alternate Christian history, is that she was never actually a prostitute, is that she was actually Jesus's wife. And when they had to elevate Jesus to God, they had to take the wife away and demonize her and do all that. There's also some bits mixed in there with the idea of control over the feminine, and it's a whole thing.
Yes.
I don't want to go too deep into the religion aspect here because I know that people that listen to my show are all over the board when it comes to their spiritual beliefs. So I don't necessarily want to offend anybody, but I do want to bring up the idea that, there are alternative theories as to, what all this stuff means. And that's
Yeah.
part of what you're talking about as you're explaining
Exactly. It's
uh,
all
your path.
interconnected, but it's all, yes, a very long
Yeah,
story. And if you want, I can come back on your podcast and we can talk about divine love and divine feminine love and what that really means.
that sounds like a lovely conversation. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we've got enough of the sort of origin story, the background, and how you came to be where you are doing what you're doing.
Well, we didn't even get to the prostitution in the United States. That's a whole nother part, too.
Well, we'll have an opportunity to talk about that a little bit as we go along, because what I want to get
Yeah.
into next is some things related to that, right? So,
Hmm.
like for instance, the next question I had was, what types of people did you typically see at the brothel? So, because again, there's this idea, all right, there's the idea that the women are all trafficked and abused and desperate and that sort of thing. But then there's also the idea that the men are all weird, pervert, crazy. Like, give me some examples. And I know in the pre-interview you actually mentioned a few of them, but give me some examples of the types of people that would come in.
Yeah. So this is actually a good time for me to specify that I worked at three different brothels in Spain, and then I worked at Sherry's Ranch in the United States in Pahrump, Nevada. Those two are completely different customers. Where I was in Spain, they were more kind of like the first one was kind of like a hole in the wall. And then the second one was a little bit more elevated. And then the third one was the largest brothel in Southern Europe that existed. I would say that the ones in Spain were men who, how do I say this? Yeah, kind of like what you said. They were not wealthy businessmen. They were more locals who wanted a place to go hang out with their buddies and drink a beer. I did see in Spain a lot of drugs, a lot of more just not as well educated kind of men. On the flip side, when I came back to the United States, I worked in the strip clubs a little bit in Las Vegas to see what those were like. And then eventually I got a job working at Sherry's Ranch, a legal brothel in Pahrump, Nevada. And there is where I saw the wealthy businessman or a man who is more educated and willing to pay a whole lot of money to have some luxury companionship. So the differences between Spain and the US were black and white.
Yeah, and you also shared, because I wrote some notes down when we spoke in the pre-interview, that, okay, so you have the wealthy businessmen, but you also shared that you would see virgins that come in that were looking for a way, didn't have opportunities necessarily to lose their virginity. You had disabled people, you had couples come in, and then you used the term brothel connoisseurs as well. So I think I wanted to mention that because, again, I wanted to kind of break the stigma that it's just all a bunch of desperate pervy dudes. Yeah, there's for sure that. And there are other potential reasons why somebody might actually want to go that route. So again,
Hmm.
just trying to make sure that we cover all sides, all aspects of this so that we can get a well-rounded picture of what's actually happening here.
Yeah, yeah. At Sherry's, some of the most surprising and endearing customers that I saw were parents, mothers bringing their sons in. Some of them were virgins, some of them, yeah, were disabled. We'd get couples who would stop in as well. I really enjoyed working with couples because I feel like if I have the honor to initiate a woman into her bisexuality, that for me is a really big deal. So I did see that kind as well. And then there were the men who other ladies at the brothel would be like, yeah, he's around here all the time. He likes to taste all the flavors of the women. And so they'll come in. I remember one of them, pretty sure he had autism. And he just wanted, that company. So you find a lot of people who are just craving intimacy, or they don't know where to find it because they're a virgin or someone who's disabled who wants to be with a professional. So there was a wide range of people who would come through the door and different price points. So you kind of had a mixed bag, but definitely the ones at Sherry's here in the US they were much more respectable.
The other reason I wanted to mention the different types of people that come in is because that's going to influence what it is you learned from this experience. So,
Right.
for instance, if everybody that came in was just a rich business guy who wanted to, get off while he was, away from his wife or whatever, okay, you'd probably still learn how to do that really well. But you would learn different things if, let's say, you were working with a virgin or a disabled person, right?
Or a widow.
Or a
Widower.
widow.
Widow. Yeah.
Well, yeah, widower if it's a man, which is kind of
Mhm.
weird. You'd think it'd be the other way around, but
Yeah.
anyway. I find it weird having to say that myself because I am a widower. So and sometimes I'm like, that just word just sounds weird to me. But anyway, um, so yeah, the types of customers that come in, the way that you would deal with them, like let's say it's a couple and it's the woman's first bisexual experience or their first time having a threesome. Like
Yes.
the things that you would want to do or in order to make that a successful experience for them, I think would be different than just your standard wealthy businessman who comes in and just wants to, do whatever he wants to do. And so that kind of leads me into the next question, which we're going to get to right after the break, which is I want to dive into some of the things that you learned from all of this. And they could be lessons that you learned in the more divey places in Spain, or they could be lessons that you learned, in the higher end places working with this, more diverse clientele. And I'm really curious to know, and I'll ask this question, again, and hopefully phrased better on the other end of the break. But I'm really curious to know what you've learned about sex, what you've learned about intimacy, what you've learned about yourself, and what you've learned about men from all of this. So, and we'll slow down. You don't have to remember all that, but that's what we're going to talk about on the other side of the break. Men, are you tired of falling short both in the bedroom and in your relationship? Do you want your woman to respect you and crave your cock? Do you want to be the man she secretly brags about to all her friends? What if you could become this man? What if you could not only master your masculine sexuality, but also be the dream man who shows up for his woman in all the ways she desires? What if you could become so irresistible that she becomes addicted to you? If you're ready to become that man, then go to kevinanthonycoaching.com/men. That is kevinanthonycoaching.com/men. That is my men's coaching program. That's where I get to show you how to be the best version of yourself, both in and out of the bedroom. And you will become that man that every woman craves. So go check that out, kevinanthonycoaching.com/men. All right. So, as I mentioned before the break, I want to talk about things that you've learned from this experience. So, let's start first with what did you learn about yourself in this experience?
I am very, very good at what I do or what I did. I am really good at holding space for a man, for a woman, for my client to feel special, heard, seen. I'm really good at making people feel comfortable and opening up. I learned that I am the light in the dark place and that I set an example of what sacred prostitution could look like in the world. I learned that I have special sex magic, special sensual abilities, an energy that is just irreplaceable.
And do you feel like that is something that is really needed in the world? Somebody that can do that, that can hold that space, that can, be that light.
Yeah, because if I put myself into a teaching position to help other women do the same thing for men, then I think we'd have a more peaceful world. And I feel like if men could open themselves up to receiving that kind of love, softening, putting their shield of masculinity to the side, then I feel like we would have happier and more connected both men and women.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that's a large part of why I do what I do. I mean, yes, I want to help people, but I also know that when people are having, healthy, happy, fulfilling sex lives, their relationships are better, their family structure is better, their work relationships are better, everything's better. And that brings us, right back to the more orgasms, less wars, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if people were happier in their lives, if their sex lives and their relationships were operating on a smoother, healthier, happier level, then the whole
Mhm.
world would be a better place, at least to some extent. I'm not saying we'd get rid of all the evil in the world, but at
Yeah.
least things would be better. So I agree with that, and I think that's you know, an interesting approach to it. I'm not sure a lot of people would be willing to go as far as you went in order to make that happen in the world, but
Not
I
everyone is meant to. Not everyone's prepared to. I've been preparing for lifetimes for this.
yeah. So then let's move on to what have you learned about men when it comes to sex, intimacy, what they're looking for, what they need, what they want?
Men need a place to become soft. Not everyone can go there, but it's what a lot of them crave. They crave to be submissive. They crave to let someone else take over. In the whole experience that I've had, I hear men who have not ever paid for sex so like against it, like, ew, no, I don't pay for sex. I have enough sex. Like, come on. Open up your mind because those who are willing to are very brave and courageous, and I respect them a lot. It's not something that's disrespectful. Yeah, I learned that there's so many men who needed to cry in my arms, and that's all they needed. They needed me to be there and listen to them and help them through their divorce or the death of their wife. Men have a soft spot too, and they deserve to have a place to do that. They don't have to be hard. They don't have to be hard all the time, literally. Like they deserve a place to be soft as well, and that's what a lot of them want.
Interesting. Would you say that more than 50% of the men that you would see would come in wanting more to like let go and be soft and, be taken care of, so to speak?
Yeah, because I was definitely I took more of the dominant role than the submissive role most of the time, where some of them were probably insecure with their abilities in sex. And so they would want me to take the initiative, probably to teach them and tell them what I like and what I want. So yeah, I'd probably say that.
Interesting. I mean, you definitely see that in the BDSM world. You see a lot of men who are super A-type personalities outside of the world of BDSM. They have, important jobs, status, money, whatever it is, and then they come into the BDSM world and then they're subs, right? Because it's
Yeah.
the only place they can actually let go and
Yeah.
explore that side of themselves. And
Yeah,
again,
that's
I
kind of
think
like where I'm at right now with my life. Like I I lead my life alone. I don't have a partner to do things for me. And so I'm kind of in my celibate mode right now, but the next time I have a sexual encounter, like I want a man to take care of me. I'm tired of always taking care of everything else around the world. So yeah, I think the face that we put out into the world is we get tired of putting up that mask. So we want the opposite in our intimate relationships
Yeah.
to keep that balance.
So, okay, we heard about what you learned about yourself and sort of it helped you understand who you are and what your gifts were and what you were here to do. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We heard about what you learned about men, which is that they don't always want to be the strong guy, that sometimes they just want to be nurtured themselves. They want to be able to let go.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned about intimacy and the, the for lack of a better term, sort of polarity between men and women. Like men and women are, opposites that come together in a beautiful way. And I'm just curious, like through this, are there any lessons that you learned about that?
Most men will come into the brothel thinking that this is just going to be a one-time thing. It's paid. It's not real. It's not real love. I cannot speak for other women, but what I can speak for myself is that it doesn't matter if I am paid or it's free, but my love is always authentic. And so I would say for other women who are maybe in the sex industry, maybe it's not, but there are sacred sex workers out there who it doesn't matter if it's a transaction or not, the love can still be authentic and true and real and start a beautiful friendship or start a beautiful relationship. So intimacy can be bought. It can also come for free. There's also things that I've learned karmically about intimacy as well. Um, Yeah, it's a good question. Does that answer enough?
It did, and it's obviously we won't have time for you to go back and reflect on that, but at some point in the future you have any ahas around that, we're in contact via email.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear it because you know one of the things that the reason why I've asked you these questions about what you've learned is because a lot of people don't have nearly as much experience, right? And they were never taught properly. And so they have a couple of, lovers, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever. They end up in a long-term relationship. Most of what they've learned, they've learned through bumbling, stumbling, making a bunch of mistakes. And generally speaking, they still have a ton to learn. Right. And so what I was curious about was, having so much experience with so many different people in different contexts,
Hmm.
if that kind of, I don't know, changed that process, sped it up a little bit, brought out some things, that maybe the average person didn't think about or hasn't experienced for themselves. And you kind of did by sharing what you learned about men and what you learned about yourself. And so, I would take away from what you shared this idea that you don't have to, of course, go into prostitution, but through this idea of making your relationship and your sex life with your partner something that's sacred and an important part of your development, you could learn things about yourself, right? Not just physically, but spiritually, mentally, emotionally, right? You could learn deeper things about your partner, right? And so, kind of just using your extreme example to make a correlation and show people how in their own lives they could learn these things as well, right?
Yeah, I will offer this bit. If you truly want to be intimate with a partner, you need to, first of all, be intimate with yourself, know yourself really well, and not be focused on any of your imperfections because sex for me is I am completely focused on my partner, and my partner is completely focused on me. That's what kind of makes it this like divine union. And so I become, we should both become selfless and be able to focus on each other to make that sexual encounter a positive one. One other thing I will say as well is what got me through and what has had my partners coming back for more is I know how to self pleasure. And so I'm never dependent on a man's member to make me orgasm. I know how to orgasm myself. Like I am a master at my own clit. And so for a woman to have that under her belt, it will guarantee her having good sex with any partner from any place in the world, from any background. If you know how to pleasure yourself, that's also going to give the man more excitement and arousal because they love watching me touch myself. So being confident as a woman with her own sexuality so much that she's not focused on herself anymore, she's focused on her partner, I think is going to enhance people's intimacy and sex lives.
I completely agree. It's one of the reasons why the first question I asked you was what you learned about yourself, right?
Mhm.
Because we do have a tendency when something's not working right in the bedroom to point the finger in the other direction and be like, well, he can't last long enough, or he doesn't do enough foreplay, or she doesn't do this, or she's not into it, or she never wants to have that, right? Rather than starting by looking at ourselves. And that is something that, I often have, whether it's single women or single men, come to me potentially wanting, to work with me as a coach. And I hear this mostly from the men, not so much from the women. Usually if the women show up and they're interested, they already know they're interested, but the men will show up and, we'll go through the whole talk and, I'll find out about their issue and I'll tell them how the program works. And then they'll go, well, I'm not in a relationship right now, so maybe I should just wait until I have somebody. That way I can, use all this stuff with my partner. To which I always say, no, do not wait until you get into a relationship and then F it all up because you don't know what you're doing. Learn now. Become the best version of yourself now, right? If every relationship is a co-creation between two people, but the only thing you can really control is yourself. So become the best version of yourself, show up in the best way that you can, and you've already dramatically increased your chances of success in this relationship.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add as well is every relationship and every sexual encounter is an invitation to know yourself deeper at a spiritual level because they are there to mirror you. And every single man, woman experience that I had, it was an elevation in my consciousness and in my ascension journey. And so with every single like transaction, that money and the experience both elevated who I am. And so it was building myself. So even when you're not charging and you're just dating, like it is all a great learning experience to continue improving yourself. So even with dating, go out and date to learn about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we've been talking a lot about your experiences and I think the overall tone has been very positive about it, right? And I know that's going to trigger some people, right? Because it's like, oh, it sounds like you're just glorifying sex work and that's wrong. I know this will get comments on YouTube from every once in a while. I get some really far, like super Christians who are just telling me how everything I'm doing is wrong and the
Blasphemous.
devil and all that kind of stuff, which, I believe I have a pretty balanced approach about healthy sexuality and what it means to be a human. And
Yeah.
so when I get those comments, it blows my mind that some people think that some of these most basic human interactions could be wrong in any way. But
Yeah.
anyway, I know some people are going to react that way to what we're sharing. And I do want to, share a balanced, idea of what this is like. So I don't want to make it sound like it's all, rainbows and unicorns and butterflies and great. And it's all about learning about yourself because there are some dark sides to the industry too. So
Mm-hmm.
I would love for you to share some of what you saw personally in that industry that was more on the dark side.
One of the biggest reasons why I left the second brothel in Spain, where I was like, I've had enough, was there was violence. There was a man who like slapped a woman in her face while they were in the room together, and I was like, okay, bye. And the first brothel, there was violence with the managing team. Like the owner and his cousin were out there screaming at each other. And I was like, okay, bye. So I did see some of that in Spain and some of the behaviors of the men there. Um, I saw the dark feminine. Women were nasty. They were so nasty. And with being in the entertainment industry, with like the dancing, and then with the sex work on the side as well, I got a lot of hate. There was a lot of bullying. It's cutthroat. It's nasty because, like, I'm beautiful. I'm a good dancer. I'm educated. Like, I'm the whole package. And so I was often a target for black magic. There are people out there still today who are paying witch doctors to try and spiritually sabotage me. And it's not going to work. But there was a lot of bullying. So a lot of the women in the industry can be very toxic and nasty. And then in Spain as well, I did see some of the brothels. There were Romanian women who basically had their pimps, and they were, I don't know if I can use the word trafficked, but it was kind of like part of their culture. And it was just like kind of shocking. And I remember one of the women was out on the streets, and I was just like, okay, that's definitely not where I'm at. It's a different level of prostitution. I learned definitely that there is, when I learned the spiritual origins of prostitution, I also learned about the different levels that there was originally when the goddess started passing down her wisdom about prostitution. I learned that luckily when I was at Sherry's, I found out that Sherry's is probably one of the only brothels in the United States of America that doesn't have trafficking. I heard that a lot of the other brothels in Nevada do have some trafficking there. So I'm very grateful and blessed that I was able to be led to the right one. Um, yeah, there can be a lot of substance abuse with women. Um, it has its dark side. It has its dark side as well. And I found out about, like the police trying to bust women and like sting operations. And then they're the ones who are actually screwing them, like having sex with the prostitutes and then putting them in jail. And I'm like, whoa, that's nasty. So I've learned a lot from both the Spanish side and the American side of what's going on. But the nastiest part is, when the patriarchy taking away the right for women to sex work, because I am for decriminalization, because I know that it's the birthright of women. So I learned a lot about how the patriarchy strips us of our rights and turns it against us. I did a master class called The Evolution of the Sex Industry, and I actually spoke to a university professor as well about how prostitution was made to be illegal and stripped us of our rights to do it just so they would keep us small and powerless. So there's a lot. There's a lot of junk in there to expose.
For sure. Well, like I said, when I was asking that question, I really wanted people to hear that, yes, you can learn amazing things. And yes, you had very positive experiences for the most part. And there are some potentially, good places and things that you can learn and all that. I did want people to know that there is a very dark side to this as
Spiritual
well.
warfare. There's spiritual warfare in there
Yeah, and there's,
and real warfare.
like everywhere else, there's people who will, seize opportunities for their own personal gain, whether that's pimps or, traffickers or drug dealers or whatever it is. And so, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. There's some very, very serious downsides to it. And I think that, some people will use that as the argument for why it should just be banned everywhere. But the reality is it's that banning of it that creates all the black markets for all those things. And if it's one thing
Always
that they've
existed.
learned,
It's
yeah,
always going to exist.
whether it's sex or it's drugs or it's guns or it's anything else, anytime we try to do the wholesale prohibition of something, we end up with black markets that harm people.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I can see positive use cases for legal prostitution. I can also see the extreme potential for really bad impacts on society. So is there an easy answer to how we solve that problem? No, but legality with parameters around it to try to keep it as safe as possible is a potential solution. And that's what you're seeing with other things. You'll see in certain countries in Europe with certain types of drugs. You'll see that they're lowering their classification and putting some rules around where they can be used and all. And in some cases, some countries, they've had a lot of success doing that, reducing addiction, reducing crime, things like that. So, you know, there are potential ways that we could make this a win-win, or at least reduce the harm that it
Mhm.
can do, because as you also pointed out, um, it's existed forever and it's always going to exist, and it doesn't matter what laws or rules you put in place.
Yeah.
It's like they say all the time, when it comes to guns, and I don't know what other people's thoughts on that are, but the reality is you can make any law you want, but the only people that pay attention to laws are law-abiding citizens, and the people that are doing all the bad shit couldn't care less about the laws, so they just do whatever they want to do, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's the same thing with anything, and it was the same thing during Prohibition in this country when they tried to ban alcohol, right? So, there's many, many examples of it. Um, so, I'm not here to tell people it should be legal or it shouldn't be legal. I just kind of wanted to present a balanced approach, and I wanted people to hear about your experience, your life, what you've learned from it, which then takes me to, you've had all of this experience, right? Now you're using all these things that you've learned to help other people. So please tell others, how they can find you, what it is you're up to these days, how you might be able to help them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sexy Sunday School has its own podcast where I talk about everything sexy and everything spiritual. So they can follow that on Spotify and on YouTube at Miss Nicole Brooke. And I have Sexy Sunday School also set up as my coaching hub and my house of wisdom on the school platform, SKOOL, where I have different courses like with my dancing, with the masterclass of the evolution of the sex industry. What else do I have? A masterclass on manifesting. So it really is a whole coaching hub of Miss Nicole Brooke, and I do offer one-on-one and even group sessions for women and men who want to find their sexy, especially when it comes to using dance as a tool to do so. They can find me on Instagram at Miss Nicole Brooke, TikTok at Miss Nicole Brooke, and I am more than happy to be invited onto either podcasts or speaking events, giving other master classes about the spiritual origins of the sex industry. Also, a scripture that I found called On the Origin of the World. I wrote an ebook about this, was literally can win women's rights, Kevin, because this scripture that was also found in a clay pot, like buried into the dunes of Egypt, gives an alternate version of the Garden of Eden. And during this whole journey, those were scriptures that I used to kind of be my guiding light in that. So I have that as an ebook, How to Find Your Sexy as an ebook, and also talking about Mary Magdalene. I have a poem book. So there's a ton of resources that they can find on my Instagram at Miss Nicole Brooke. There's a link in my bio and it has a link to everything. So I would love to continue talking about this topic with anyone who wants to know more. So yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to get my story out there because there is a lot of power in what I'm talking about. I present what sacred prostitution could look like in a dream-like world, and then you look at the Epstein files and that's like the darkest. So I can help people wrap their minds around something that has been hidden under the carpet especially in the United States for a very long time, and we need to be brave enough these days to actually confront what exists in the world. We can't change anything that we don't see. So I hope to help people see this in a way that is beneficial for them and that can end trafficking and purify the sex industry to be something beautiful, enlightening, and loving for all parties involved.
Indeed, if we want to solve some problems, we have to bring them out of the shadows and into the light. That's always the first step. We have to be
Yep.
willing to look at it, admit it exists before we
Yep.
can actually solve it. Well, Miss Nicole Brooke, thank you for coming on and sharing your story. It actually takes quite a bit of bravery
Yeah.
to publicly tell people, this long story and where you've been and what you've done. And so I appreciate you coming on and sharing that. I hope that people learned something from this. And I hope that if you didn't learn something, you were at least somewhat entertained by it. My primary goal is always education, but at least, if you could,
Infotainment.
there you go. All right. So, lastly, thanks again for coming
Thank
on the show and
you.
help
I
us strength.
appreciate you.
All right, everybody. That's all the time I have for this episode, and I will see you next week. I hope you liked this episode of the Love Lab podcast. If you enjoy this show, subscribe, leave me a review, and share it with your friends. And for more free exclusive content, join me in the Passion Vault at kevinanthonycoaching.com/vault. That's kevinanthonycoaching.com/vault. Thanks for listening. And remember, as Celine used to say, you're amazing.